The truth is, it's always been right in front of you. Beneath the thick, suffocating layers of social convention and the polished veneer of modern progress lies the raw, uncompromising reality of the human animal, the flesh. It is a vessel of desire, a record of trauma, and a silent witness to the passage of time. In David Salay's masterful and haunting novel Flesh, we are thrust into the desolate landscape of late 20th century life, a place of grey concrete and muffled aspirations. Here, we meet Laszlo, a young man whose world is defined by shyness, awkwardness, and an overwhelming sense of isolation. His existence is quiet, almost spectral, until the primal pull of the physical world, the hunger of the flesh, drags him into a series of events that will irrevocably alter the trajectory of his life. Laszlo is the quintessential everyman caught in the gears of a destiny he neither understands nor controls. His journey begins not with a choice, but with a submission to the gravity of his environment and the unspoken needs of those around him. Moving through a world that feels both hyperreal and strangely distant, Laszlo becomes a pawn in a game of desire and consequence. Where the body speaks when the voice cannot, the setting is a London of harsh edges and cold interiors. Where the air is heavy with the smell of raw meat and damp pavement. Laszlo, a 24-year-old Hungarian immigrant, lives with his mother in a cramped, soul-sucking apartment. He is a man of significant physical bulk, a fact that Szalay emphasizes with a clinical, almost brutal precision. Laszlo's body is his primary interface with the world, yet it is a source of profound discomfort. He is always sweating, always conscious of the space he occupies, always aware of the friction of his clothes against his skin. He works in the offal trade, a business that deals in the viscera of animals, the hearts, the livers, the tongues, the parts of the creature that are most undeniably flesh. His daily life is a sensory assault of cold storage units, blood-stained aprons, and the rhythmic thud of cleavers. It is a world where life is reduced to its most basic, material components. Laszlo's mother is a spectral presence, her own life withered by the disappointment of emigration and the loss of her husband. She and Laszlo live in a symbiotic silence, their communication reduced to the barest necessities of existence. It is his mother who, perhaps out of a desperate hope to see her son engage with the living world, suggests he help their neighbor, a woman named Mrs. Higgins. She is older, lonely, and physically decaying in her own way. Her apartment a museum of faded wallpaper and the stale scent of medicine. What begins as a simple act of charity, carrying groceries up the stairs, quickly descends into something far more complex and troubling. Mrs. Higgins, recognizing the loneliness in Laszlo that mirrors her own, begins to seduce him. The seduction is not romantic, it is an act of predation fueled by a desperate need for the warmth of another body before the light fades out completely. Shutterstock. In the dimly lit rooms of her apartment, Laszlo is initiated into the mysteries of the flesh. The descriptions of their encounters are devoid of eroticism, they are instead focused on the textures of skin, the weight of limbs, and the desperate, clumsy mechanics of the act. For Laszlo, this is a negredo phase, an alchemical darkening of the soul. He is pulled down into the massa confusa, the chaotic primal matter of existence. He does not love this woman, he barely even knows her. Yet, he is drawn back to her apartment again and again, compelled by a force he cannot name. It is as if his own body has taken over, overriding his mind and his morality. He is a passive participant in his own life, a blank slate upon which the needs of others are written. The affair is a secret that rots him from the inside, a burden as heavy as his own physical frame. The tension of this clandestine life reaches a horrific climax when Mrs. Higgins' husband unexpectedly returns. The confrontation is a nightmare of domestic squalor. The husband, a man whose presence had previously been only a ghostly suggestion, is now a physical threat. In a moment of blind, animalistic panic, a reflex of the flesh trying to protect itself from intrusion, Laszlo pushes the man. It is a singular, irreversible act of violence. The husband tumbles backward, falling down the concrete stairwell of the apartment building. The sound of the body hitting the stairs is the sound of Laszlo's world shattering. The man is killed instantly. In the aftermath, The silence of the apartment block is more deafening than the fall. Laszlo is no longer just an awkward immigrant, he is a killer. The machinery of the state, cold and impersonal, begins to turn. He is arrested, processed, and sentenced to prison. The incarceration of Laszlo is the ultimate confinement of the flesh. In prison, his body is no longer his own, it is property of the state. He is subjected to the harsh, institutionalized violence of the penal system, where the hierarchy of strength is the only law. Yet, strangely, it is in prison that Laszlo begins to find a different kind of silence. He retreats further into himself, becoming a master of exteriority. He learns to live entirely on the surface, performing the tasks required of him with a robotic efficiency while his inner self remains hidden in an impenetrable vault. He is a man who has been processed by life. His innocence not just lost, but surgically removed. When he is finally released, he is a different creature altogether, hardened, watchful, and profoundly disconnected from the world he re-enters. The first part of Flesh serves as a grim meditation on the material ego. Under the lens of Jungian psychology, Laszlo represents the individual who is completely overwhelmed by the soma, the physical aspect of being. His obesity is a symbol of his inability to contain his own psychic energy. It spills out into the world as excess mass, a protective layer against a reality he cannot navigate. His affair with the older woman is a desperate attempt to find the anima, but because it is rooted in the negredo, the darkest, unrefined part of the psyche, it leads to death rather than rebirth. The accidental killing of the husband is the shadow asserting itself with catastrophic force. It is the moment when the repressed anger and frustration of his marginalized life erupt in a way that destroys everything he has tried to build. The lesson here is the danger of living in the surface. When we ignore the spiritual and psychological dimensions of our existence, we become slaves to our biological impulses and the whims of our environment. Laszlo's passivity is his greatest sin. By refusing to take agency over his life, he allows himself to be swept away by the current of events. His imprisonment is merely an externalization of the internal prison he has lived in since birth. The novel suggests that the flesh is a heavy burden, a mortal coil that can easily become a noose if we do not find a way to transcend it. Laszlo's story is a warning about the fragility of the civilized self and the terrifying ease with which we can slip back into the state of the animal. In the chapters that follow, we see Laszlo's life take a series of unexpected turns. He moves into the world of business, into the world of high finance, and eventually into the world of global conflict. Each transition is marked by a further alienation from his own humanity. He becomes a professional survivor, a man who can thrive in any environment because he has no core to protect. He travels across Europe, from the grey industrial parks of Belgium to the sterile hotels of Germany, always dealing in the trade of flesh, first as meat, then as a bodyguard, and finally as a facilitator of commerce. His body remains his primary tool, but it is a tool that he has learned to wield with a cold, calculated indifference. The narrative style of David Szalay is crucial here. His prose is detached, clinical, and devoid of sentimentality. He describes a sexual encounter with the same flat objectivity as he describes a business transaction or a meal. This creates a sense of uncanny realism, where the reader feels as though they are observing a specimen under a microscope. It forces us to confront the objectivity of pain and the banality of desire. We see Laszlo not as a character to be pitied, but as a phenomenon to be studied. He is the man of the 21st century, a being who is perfectly adapted to a world that has no use for the soul. His journey is a trajectory of upward mobility that is simultaneously a downward spiral of the spirit. The great work of the novel is the exploration of how the flesh survives in an age of mechanical and digital reproduction. As Laszlo moves into the world of the ultra-wealthy, he sees how the elite use their resources to transcend the limitations of the body. They eat the finest food, they undergo the best treatments, and they surround themselves with an armor of luxury. Yet, beneath it all, the same biological imperatives remain. They are still just flesh, subject to the same decay and the same eventual end. Laszlo's role as an outsider among the elite allows him to see the emptiness of the vessel. He sees that their success is as much of a prison as his poverty was. He remains a ghost in their world, a silent observer who understands the secret that they are all trying to forget, that we are all just meat in the end. This first third of the story sets the stage for a grander, more philosophical inquiry into the nature of existence. It establishes the themes of alienation, corporality, and the weight of history. Laszlo is a man without a country, without a family, and without a god. He is the pure individual, stripped of all communal ties and forced to survive on his own. His struggle is the struggle of every person who has ever felt trapped in their own skin, unable to bridge the gap between their internal world and the external reality. It is a story of materialism taken to its logical, and perhaps tragic, conclusion. As we follow Laszlo into the next phase of his life, we are forced to wonder, is there any escape from the flesh? Or are we destined to be consumed by it? The pace of the novel accelerates as Laszlo enters the military. This is a new kind of flesh-processing machine. In the army, he is no longer an individual, he is a body to be trained, utilized, and potentially sacrificed. He is sent to the Gulf War, where the flesh meets the machinery of death. The descriptions of the desert are haunting, a vast, indifferent expanse that mirrors Laszlo's own internal emptiness. Here, the Negredo reaches its most literal form, the blackness of oil fires, the charcoal of burned-out tanks, the darkness of the nights spent in foxholes. Laszlo performs his duties with a cold, mechanical efficiency. He has learned that the key to survival is to not feel. He is a ghost in a war zone, a body among bodies, waiting for the command to move, to shoot, or to die. The war is a turning point. It cements Laszlo's apathy as a survival strategy. He sees the fragility of human life on a massive scale, and it confirms his belief that we are nothing more than biological accidents. When he returns from the war, he is more hardened than ever. He takes on various jobs, as a bouncer, a security guard, a driver for a wealthy businessman. Each job requires him to use his flesh as a barrier or a tool. He is a man who stands between the club and the street, between the executive and the assassin, between the past and the future. He is a liminal being, existing in the spaces between things, never quite belonging to any of them. He is the eternal outsider, a man who has mastered the surface of life but has forgotten how to breathe. As he moves through the world, he becomes a witness to the decay of Europe. He sees the crumbling infrastructure of the East and the hollow opulence of the West. He sees how the flesh of nations is being consumed by the cancer of globalism. He is a man of the interzone, a place where national identities and moral certainties have evaporated. He is a stateless person, not just legally, but spiritually. His journey is a pilgrimage to nowhere, a search for a center that no longer exists. He is the modern nomad, carrying his flesh like a heavy suitcase, moving from one non-place to another, airports, hotels, highways, warehouses. He is the unseen hand that makes the world work, the anonymous body that keeps the gears turning. The first part of our summary ends with Laszlo in London, having achieved a measure of stability. He is a driver for a wealthy man. He has a girlfriend. He is a routine. But beneath the surface, the flesh is still restless. The memory of the man he killed, the years in prison, the heat of the desert, all of it is bubbling just beneath the skin. He is a ticking time bomb of suppressed trauma. He has built a life on the surface, but the depths are calling. He is about to be pulled into a new series of events that will test his resolution to the breaking point. The Negredo is nearing its end, and the albedo, the washing, the purification, is about to begin. But in the world of David Szalay, the washing is often as violent as the soiling. The silence inside the Mercedes-Benz S-Class was not merely the absence of sound, it was a pressurized vacuum. A manufactured stillness that cost more than Laszlo had earned in his first 3 years in London. As a chauffeur for the upper echelons of the city's financial elite, his life had become a series of reflected surfaces and muted observations. He sat in the driver's seat, a monument of stoic flesh, his broad shoulders filling the frame of his dark suit. Through the rear-view mirror, he watched the world behind him, the high-powered brokers, the restless heiresses, the men who moved numbers across screens as if they were gods rearranging the stars. To them, Laszlo was a part of the upholstery, a necessary but invisible extension of the machine. This invisibility was his sanctuary. It allowed him to retreat further into the albedo phase of his existence, a period of supposed purification where he washed away the grime of the prison and the blood of the desert through the ritualistic cleaning of leather and glass. He had become a connoisseur of the non-place, those liminal spaces of transit, airport lounges, hotel lobbies, and the climate-controlled cabins of luxury vehicles, where identity is suspended and one exists only as a function of movement. His relationship with Maya, a woman he met in a dimly lit pub in Hammersmith, was another attempt at grounding himself in the normal. Maya was a waitress, her own life a weary cycle of service, and in their shared exhaustion, they found a kind of tepid comfort. Their intimacy was a quiet, almost apologetic exchange of bodies. When they lay together in his small, damp apartment, it was a meeting of two tired animals seeking heat. There was no poetry in their passion, only the blunt reality of skin against skin, the rhythmic thud of the flesh trying to beat back the encroaching cold of the city. Laszlo often looked at Maya in the moonlight and felt a profound sense of alienation. He saw her as a collection of textures, the roughness of her palms, the softness of her neck, but he could not reach the person inside. He was a man who had been hollowed out by his past, a vessel that had forgotten what it was meant to contain. In Jungian terms, this was the desert of the soul, a period of spiritual dryness where the ego has survived the initial trauma but has not yet found a new center of gravity. He was functioning, but he was not living. His anima, once projected onto the older woman in the housing estate, was now a dormant, shadowy presence, appearing only in his dreams as a faceless figure beckoning him toward a body of water he could never reach. The turning point came when his employer, a man of immense wealth and opaque morals named Mr. Sterling, offered him a promotion. It was not a promotion in the traditional sense, but an invitation into a deeper circle of trust, and a darker shade of the flesh. Sterling was involved in the global trade of high-end commodities, but his interests often veered into the grey market. He needed someone who was physically imposing, psychologically detached, and strategically silent. Laszlo was the perfect candidate. He was tasked with accompanying Sterling on a business trip across Europe, acting as both driver and facilitator. As they crossed the Channel and drove through the industrial heartlands of Belgium and Germany, the landscape began to shift. The polished surfaces of London were replaced by the skeletal remains of the 20th century, rusted factories, abandoned warehouses, and the stark, utilitarian architecture of the East. The flesh was no longer just the human body, it was the flesh of the infrastructure, the decaying body of a continent in transition. In a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of Prague, Laszlo found himself back in the world of his youth, the meat trade. But this was different. Sterling was brokering a deal for a massive shipment of hormone-treated beef, destined for markets with lax regulations. Standing in the cavernous, refrigerated space, surrounded by thousands of hanging carcasses, Laszlo felt a surge of déjà vu. The smell of cold fat and iron was a sensory trigger, dragging him back to the offal trade and the accidental death that had defined his life. He looked at the rows of meat and saw himself, a biological commodity, a piece of matter to be weighed, valued, and moved. This was the massa confusa returning with a vengeance. The alchemist within him, the dormant potential for transformation, began to stir. He realized that as long as he remained a servant to the flesh of commerce, he would never be free. He was still the slave he had been in the desert, still the inmate he had been in the prison. The change of clothes and the luxury car were merely a persona, a mask that hid the unchanging reality of his servitude. The albedo phase, which he thought was a time of healing, was revealed to be a state of numbness. To truly heal, he would have to undergo a second Negredo, a conscious immersion into the darkness he had been trying to outrun. During a tense negotiation between Sterling and a group of local intermediaries, a conflict erupted. It was a clash of egos and appetites, a power struggle in its purest, most primitive form. Laszlo, tasked with protecting his employer, had to exert his physical presence. He moved with a practiced, lethal efficiency, but as he felt his hands close around a man's throat, He was struck by a moment of an agony, sudden, blinding realization. He saw the terror in the other man's eyes and recognized it as his own. He was the shadow manifest, the agent of the violence he claimed to despise. In that moment of intense psychological tension, he did not finish the act. He released the man and walked out of the warehouse, leaving the world of high-stakes flesh behind. This act of refusal was his first true gesture of agency. He left Sterling, left the car, and left the promise of wealth. He began a nomadic journey across the continent, traveling by train and bus, sleeping in hostels and on the couches of strangers. He was seeking a purification that could not be found in a soapy bucket or an expensive suit. He moved through the non-places of Europe with a new purpose, to observe the world without trying to own it or fear it. He became a flaneur of the flesh, a witness to the myriad ways in which people inhabited their bodies. He saw the beauty in the sagging skin of the elderly, the grace in the labor of the construction worker, and the tragic fragility in the eyes of the young. He was beginning to understand that the flesh was not a prison, but a canvas of experience. His apathy was transforming into empathy. This was the true work of the albedo, not the avoidance of the world, but the washing of the perception. In the city of Trieste, a place of overlapping histories and fading grandeur, Laszlo found work in a small, family-run bakery. Here, the flesh was the dough, a living, breathing substance that required patience, heat, and a gentle touch. He worked in the early hours of the morning, his large hands kneading the flour and water into a sustenance that would feed the neighborhood. It was a humble labor, a return to the prime matter of life. For the first time, he felt a sense of connection to the work of his hands. He was no longer dealing in the offal of death or the commodities of greed. He was participating in the cycle of life. His body, which had always felt like an awkward burden, began to feel like a tool of creation. He was grounding himself in the physical world in a way that did not require the suppression of his soul. This was the integration of the senses, where the physical act of baking became a form of active imagination. Yet, the shadow of his past still lingered in the corners of the bakery. News from London reached him. Mr. Sterling had been arrested for fraud and human trafficking. The flesh he had been driving around was more literal and more horrific than Laszlo had imagined. The realization that he had been an unwitting accomplice to such depravity was a new negredo. It forced him to confront the morality of passivity. He realized that to not choose is still a choice, and that his silence had been a form of complicity. This was a spiritual crisis that required more than just the kneading of bread. He had to account for his life. He began to write, not a confession, but an internal ledger, a record of every moment he had allowed himself to be a thing instead of a person. He was recollecting the fragments of his soul that he had left in the prison, the desert, and the luxury cars. As he walked along the Adriatic coast, the blue of the water merging with the blue of the sky, he felt the first stirrings of the rubedo. He was no longer trying to escape his body, he was learning to inhabit it with integrity. He looked at his reflection in the water and did not see a killer or a servant or a fat man. He saw a being in process. He understood that the flesh is the altar upon which the sacred is sacrificed and reborn. His journey was a testament to the resilience of the psyche and its ability to find meaning in the most material of circumstances. He was ready for the final stage, the return to the center, where he would have to face the ultimate truth of his existence. He was no longer afraid of the flesh, for he had seen the light that shines through it. The lesson of this middle passage is the necessity of moral agency. We cannot hide behind our roles or our circumstances. We are responsible for the space we occupy in the world, both physically and ethically. Laszlo's journey from a silent driver to an active participant in his own life is a model for the awakening of the individual. It reminds us that transformation is not a destination, but a continuous refinement of the self. We must be willing to burn our old identities to make room for the new. We must be willing to see the meat of our lives for what it is, the raw material of our personal legend. As the chapter ends, Laszlo receives a letter from Hungary. His mother is dying. The original source of his flesh is fading. He must go back to the beginning, back to the grey concrete housing estates and the muffled aspirations to complete the circle of his life. He is going back to face the ghost of the husband he killed and the shadow of the boy he once was. He is going back to see if he can find forgiveness in the place where he first lost his innocence. The great work is approaching its final, most difficult stage. The fire is at its hottest. The rubedo is near. The train ride from Trieste back to the borders of Hungary was a rhythmic passage through the cemetery of László's own history. Every clatter of the tracks seemed to echo a heartbeat he had long tried to ignore. A visceral reminder that the flesh can never truly outrun its origins. The landscape outside shifted from the shimmering Adriatic blue to the somber, rain-heavy greens and greys of Central Europe, mirroring the transition from the albedo, the stage of purification and reflection, back into the final, harrowing nigredo that must precede the ultimate transformation. László sat by the window, his large frame cramped in the seat, feeling the weight of his own body as an anchor that grew heavier the closer he got to Budapest. He was no longer the frightened boy who had fled the scene of a tragedy, nor the detached observer he had become in London and the desert. He was a man returning to the source of his first matter, the raw, unrefined material of his existence that had been molded by trauma, hunger, and silence. The flesh was calling him home to witness its own expiration in the form of his dying mother. The hospital in Budapest was a brutalist monument to decay. A place where the air was thick with the scent of antiseptic, boiled cabbage, and the unmistakable metallic tang of approaching death. László walked through the corridors, his heavy footfalls echoing against the linoleum, feeling the stares of the staff who saw in his massive, silent presence a figure of ominous weight. When he finally reached his mother's bedside, he was confronted with the ultimate fragility of the flesh. The woman who had given him life, the original source of his own physical being, was now a shriveled husk, her skin like yellowed parchment stretched over brittle bone. In this moment, the mother archetype, once a source of suffocating protection and later a ghost of guilt, was reduced to its most basic biological components. As he held her hand, feeling the faint, fluttering pulse, László experienced a profound salutio, a dissolving of the ego boundaries that had kept him isolated for so long. He wept, not just for his mother, but for the tragedy of the flesh itself, the inevitable decline of the material vessel that carries the spirit through time. Her death, when it came, was a quiet evaporation, a final release of the psyche from the soma. With his mother's passing, the last thread connecting László to a sense of belonging was severed. He was now truly prima materia, a substance ready for the final firing of the alchemical furnace. He felt an irresistible compulsion to visit the site of his original sin, the apartment block where he had pushed a man to his death. Standing once again in that concrete canyon of the housing estate, the air felt stagnant, trapped in the amber of 1980s despair. He climbed the stairs to the landing where the confrontation had occurred. The concrete was cold and indifferent, a silent witness to the moment that had fractured his life. He looked down the stairwell, visualizing the fall, the sound, the stillness. In this nekia, or descent into the underworld of his own memory, László confronted his shadow with eyes wide open. He realized that the man he had killed was not just a victim of a panicked accident, but a sacrifice on the altar of his own unacknowledged existence. He stopped trying to explain it away as an accident of the flesh and accepted it as a deed of the soul. This acceptance was the beginning of the rubedo, the final stage of alchemy where the white light of reflection turns into the red blood of lived reality. He did not seek forgiveness from the law or the widow, for he understood that the only forgiveness that mattered was the integration of the act into his being. He was a killer, and he was a baker, he was a soldier, and he was a son. He was a man of flesh who had finally recognized the spirit that animated it. This realization brought with it a strange, quiet power. He left the city and moved to a small village in the Hungarian countryside, taking a job as a laborer on a farm. Here, the flesh was put to work in the service of the earth. He spent his days tilling soil, hauling grain, and tending to livestock. His body, once a source of shame and a heavy burden, became a sacrament. The physical exertion was no longer a punishment but a communion with the material world. He ate simply, slept deeply, and spoke even less than before. But his silence was no longer a wall, it was a presence. He had achieved the alchemical marriage, hieros gamos, the union of the heavy, terrestrial flesh with the light, celestial spirit. In the final year of the narrative, Laszlo becomes a figure of local mystery. A gentle giant whose strength is legendary but whose temper is non-existent. He has reached a state of apatheia, not in the sense of lack of feeling, but in the sense of freedom from the passions that once enslaved him. He looks at the world with the eyes of the old wise man, seeing the cycle of birth, growth, decay, and rebirth in everything from the wheat in the field to the clouds in the sky. He is no longer a stranger to himself. He has mapped the terra incognita of his interior life and found that it is identical to the world around him. His flesh is no longer a prison, it is a temple, a place where the universe comes to experience itself in all its heavy, tactile glory. The great work is complete. He is a man who has digested his own history and turned the bitterness of his experiences into the elixir of wisdom. The psychological significance of the ending lies in the reclamation of the body. In modern society, we often treat the body as either a machine to be optimized or a shameful secret to be hidden. Laszlo's journey through the flesh is a rejection of both these extremes. He finds a middle way where the body is accepted as the necessary vessel for the soul's evolution. His return to the earth is a symbolic grounding, a refusal to live in the abstractions of finance or the fantasies of the ego. He has moved from the materialism of consumption to the materialism of connection. His flesh is the bridge between the self and the all. He has become a living stone, a foundational element of the world that is both heavy with the weight of reality and light with the grace of understanding. Reflecting on the totality of David Salay's flesh, we see a masterpiece of visceral realism that functions as a profound meditation on the human condition. The book challenges the reader to look at the meat of their own lives, the raw, unglamorous facts of our biological existence, and find the sacred within it. Laszlo is a hero for an age of disembodiment, a reminder that we cannot escape our nature by moving to a new city or buying a new car. We can only find peace by descending into the flesh, facing the shadow, and allowing ourselves to be burned and washed until only the truth remains. It is a story that refuses to offer easy comfort, insisting instead on the brutal beauty of the truth. The flesh is indeed a burden, but it is also the only place where we can truly be. The core message of the novel is that the transcendence of our suffering is not found by escaping the physical world, but by plunging so deeply into the reality of our flesh that we eventually break through to the spirit that sustains it. We are not spirits having a human experience, we are flesh discovering its own divinity through the agony and ecstasy of existence. Szalay strips away the myths of progress and success to reveal the primordial man, the one who must eat, sleep, and die, and yet, in that very necessity, finds a dignity that is indestructible. The great work is simply to be fully, uncompromisingly human in a world that would rather we be anything else. As the final pages turn, we see Laszlo standing in a field at sunset, his silhouette immense against the darkening sky. He is a man of flesh, heavy and real, yet he is also a part of the light. He has moved through the negredo of his youth, the albedo of his middle years, and has finally reached the rubedo of his maturity. He is a testament to the resilience of the soul and its ability to find meaning in the most material of circumstances. His silence is a song of acceptance, a hymn to the weight of the world. He is no longer afraid of the end, for he has understood that the flesh returns to the earth to feed the next cycle of life. He is one with the grain, one with the soil, and one with the wind. The flesh has done its work. The journey is complete. The flesh is the crucible where the soul is forged. To deny the body is to lose the spirit, but to master the body is to find the world.